So, Yasmin, read. The cause of our world existence.
The cause of our world existence is not, as our present experience induces us to believe, the ego. For the ego is only a result and a circumstance of our mode of world existence. It is a relation which the many souled Purusha has set up between individualized minds and bodies. A relation of self defense and mutual exclusion and aggression in order to have among all the dependencies of things in the world upon each other a possibility of independent mental and physical experience. But there can be no absolute independence upon these planes. Impersonality, which rejects all mental and physical becoming, is therefore the only possible culmination of this exclusive movement. So, only can an absolutely independent self experience be achieved. The soul then seems to exist absolutely independently in itself. It is free in the sense of the Indian word swadhina, dependent only on itself, not dependent upon God and other beings. Therefore, in this experience, God, personal self, and other beings are all denied, cast away as distinctions of the ignorance. It is the ego recognizing its own insufficiency and abolishing both itself and its contraries, that its own essential instinct of independent self experience may be accomplished. For it finds that its effort to achieve it by relations with God and others is afflicted throughout with a sentence of illusion, vanity, and nullity. It ceases to admit them because by admitting them, it becomes dependent on them. It ceases to admit its own persistence because the persistence of ego means the admission of that which it tries to exclude as not self, of the cosmos and other beings. The self annihilation of the Buddhist is in its nature absolute exclusion of all that the mental being perceives. The self immersion of the Advaitin in his absolute being is the self same aim, differently conceived. Both are a supreme self assertion of the soul, of its exclusive independence of Prakriti.
Very subtle, and we have to, we'll try and uncover the subtlety and make it clear. Okay, so we'll try our best. Basically, what he's saying is, he is making the difference between level 1 and level 2. Level 1, you are identified with your body, mind, life, and you think that you are separate existence in the physical world, which is an illusion. You are actually connected with everybody else, and it's very obvious at the physical level. We keep on repeating this so that it becomes absolutely something, we don't even question it. It should become so obvious. All my body is the same as everybody else's body. Okay? We see this very clearly. But we don't see that my vital is the same substance as all other people's vital. We don't see that. We see it as separate. Even the body we see it as separate, but intellectually we can understand that my body is matter and your body also is matter, somebody else's body also is matter. So that is a commonality. That word which we discussed the other day, commonality. Okay? Similarly, my vital is the same as everybody else. My mind also. Even my soul, which seems to be separate, okay, even in the spiritual plane, the soul seems to be separate. But it is only part of God, and God is common to all the souls. He uses a very interesting expression, and we will see that. So basically, he is making a difference between life in the physical world, where you are seeing the multiplicity and it's real to you, and when you go into the higher levels of consciousness, in the spiritual planes of consciousness, the world disappears and your ego also disappears. So naturally you come to the conclusion that my ego is the one that is giving me existence in the physical world. Because when you take your consciousness to the spiritual planes, the second level, your existence in the physical world gets cancelled. Okay? The Buddhists make it absolutely cancelled, total cancellation. Okay? But the Advaitins say it is not total cancellation, it is part cancellation. So we look at that and we go back to the beginning of the para and then we see each one. So this is basically the idea that he is working on. So, the cause of our world existence is not, as our present experience induces us to believe, the ego. Okay? He is not talking of the normal human being because we don't think that the ego has caused my existence in the physical world. Only when you make your consciousness go to the self and then your ego disappears and at the same time you are outside the world. So you think, oh, my existence in the world is because of ego, because when I am outside my body mind life the ego has disappeared. So it is the ego that is giving me existence in the physical world. Okay, because the two go together. When you make your consciousness in the higher mind above the normal mind, the normally the ego disappears, okay? And you lose your identification body mind life. Then if it's an experience, you come back and you see again that the ego has come back and you are seeing the separation from everybody else. Now you remember your experience of the oneness, but it's only a remembrance, it's not a reality to you anymore. Because in the beginning you have an experience and then the consciousness comes back into your body, and then this goes on several times until finally you can station your consciousness permanently in the spiritual levels of consciousness. Then it becomes a realization and not an experience. Okay? So when you have an experience and you go up and come down again, you see that existence in the physical world is giving you separation from everybody else, and that's the ego. We have defined the ego as feeling separate from everybody else, seeing the multiplicity. And when you go into the higher level of consciousness, you feel yourself to be outside your body mind life, you are outside the universe, and the ego is not there. So you naturally equate the two. You equate the ego with existence in the physical. This we don't see at our level. You can see this only when you go to the self. Okay? So
Can I ask you a question?
please go ahead.
You said that your consciousness, if it goes up to the higher mental, then you lose
Yes.
your ego.
Yes.
But how do you know where your consciousness is? I don't even know where the hell my consciousness is. How can I move it around? Mother says you can move your consciousness from here to there and all sorts of things. But
Okay.
where the hell is your consciousness in yourself?
That is the ignorance. That is when we don't know where our consciousness is, that is we are in ignorance. But through yoga or through the grace of God, if you have the experience of the self, ignorance disappears. Remember that. And then consciousness comes in. Then you realize, not now, we can't recognize it now. But when you feel and leave consciousness alone, why do you start yoga at all? Everybody is not wanting to do yoga at all. They are not interested even. When do you start your yoga? When you feel the suffocation of the limitations in your being. Okay. When you feel there is so much of falsehood in me, there is so much of egoism in me, there is so much, at that time you want to get rid of it. And this feeling comes only when there is a development in the soul from many, many lives. So your question is the answer is very clear. You don't know what your consciousness is. We don't know. Neither I nor I suppose you also don't know because you're asking the question. But if you go, your consciousness rises to the self, okay, above the higher, in the higher mind, then you suddenly realize that, oh my God, this is my real consciousness, this is my true being. Okay, that is when you realize what consciousness is. Otherwise, you don't. That's the answer. So, the answer to your question is rise to the higher level of consciousness, you will know where your consciousness is. Okay, so At that time, and the two go together, being outside the universe and the ego. If you are in the universe, the ego comes in. If you are outside the ego, the universe disappears, and so does the ego. So you think that the two are same. The ego is the one that gives you the existence in the physical world. They are results of each other, but they are not the condition. Ego is not the one that is making you live in the physical world. Okay. But there is another condition. When you go to the third level, the ego is not there, but you can live in the physical world without the ego. Only at the third level. So let's summarize the situation. The situation is, when you are at level 1, identified with your body, mind, life, you are in ignorance and you see the multiplicity and you don't know what consciousness is. We don't know. Only mentally we have got some concepts. But when through yoga, and again I told you, yoga is when you are fed up with your own limitations and you make an effort. And after many, maybe lives, or even maybe one life, or after much effort, your consciousness somehow, by grace or by your own effort, you rise to the level of the second level. There the ego disappears, and also usually the world also disappears. Okay? That's why the Buddhists say that's the solution to the problem of pain and suffering and imperfections. But you are not living in the physical world anymore. You are living in the second level, which is outside the universe. Then, but Sri Aurobindo says that I want to live in my body, mind, life, but without the limitation and the ego. So for that you have to go to the third level. When you go to the third level, the supermind, then it is possible to come down into your body, mind, life, occupy that house which is your body, mind, life, and yet not be subject to the body, mind, life, not to ego, not to ignorance, and not to multiplicity. This is the idea. So that's why these three planes are very important. We have to keep in mind. Okay? If you keep the three levels in mind, everything becomes quite clear. Yasmin, the answer to your question is now more or less clear?
Sort of.
Okay. The more you think about it, it's actually quite simple. If you remember the three levels and their characteristics, then you will understand. Okay? The more you think about it, the more it becomes absolutely real. Like my effort with the computer, okay? I don't understand which symbol is what I should do, but slowly by practicing, things become clearer to me. Okay? Every day I learn something. Oh, this icon means this, and that icon means that, and I should not mix up the two. So slowly the thing becomes clearer to us. So I go back to the text. The cause of our world existence is not, as our present experience induces us to believe, the ego. Okay? But that present experience is escaping to the, because remember the chapter. Okay? The chapter is liberation of the soul. Huh? The soul and its liberation. So when you are liberated, you realize that existence in the physical world necessarily brings in the ego, and the ego by definition is that which makes you see the many, which is false. So therefore it is ignorance, limitation. Okay? I go to the next phrase. For the ego is only a result and not a circumstance of our mode of world existence. Because you can remain in the world existence without the ego, and that is possible only at the third level, not in the second level. That's why in our Indian system of yoga, liberation is wonderful. But they don't think of coming back into the physical world because they feel, if I go back again, there will be ego and limitation and ignorance. Why the hell should I go down? So you get stuck at the second level itself. But the rare soul like Sri Aurobindo and Mother, they say, no, the physical world is not to be rejected. We have to go down, but when we go down, we should not again fall into the net of ignorance. We should be free. And that is possible only at the higher level. Okay? So, for the ego is only a result and a circumstance of our mode of world existence. Okay? It is not a necessary condition of world existence. That's what he's saying. It is possible to be in the physical world and yet be without an ego. The two are not absolutely linked together forever. It's not like that. Okay? But it's a relation which the many-souled Purusha has set up between individualized mind and bodies, a relation of self-defense and mutual exclusion and aggression in order to have among the dependencies of things in the physical world upon each other, a possibility of independent mental and physical experience. The language, we have to get through the net of the language and understand the essence of what is. What is this ego? He is defining it. It's a relation with the many-souled Purusha. The Purusha is one. The Purusha is the eternal consciousness. And when it expresses itself in the physical world, it breaks itself up, relatively speaking. It breaks itself, apparently it breaks itself up into many souls. Your soul, my soul have all come from the universal Purusha. Okay? Many-souled Purusha. Many-souled Purusha, the universal Purusha. You can think of it as the universe, the divine consciousness, if you want, has set up between individual. Why is the ego necessary? He is explaining. It's a relation which the many-souled Purusha has set up between individualized minds and bodies. Okay? Not the soul. It's not a, it can be a relation between soul and soul also, but that relation, the relationship is eliminated because you realize that your soul and the other souls are all the same. So he's stressing the minds and bodies. Individualized minds and bodies, a relation of self-defense and mutual exclusion and aggression. Two friends can have friendship, okay? But they can also exclude each other and fight, mutual exclusion and aggression, in order to have among all the dependencies of things in the world upon each other, a possibility of independent mental and physical experience. The universal consciousness is a fact, but also according to the divine, the individual consciousness also is a fact, which the Mayavadins and the Buddhists deny. Okay? The individuality is not a fact, they say. But they say, no, it is a fact. Okay? So, all the dependence of things in the world upon each other, a possibility of independent mental and physical experience. The universe is made so that the many can experience the vast variety of things in the physical world. When you have only a unity, you have only one. You can't experience all the different sides of it. So that's why the many is created out of the one, so that you can experience the world in all its aspects. It's wonderful. Why should we not experience all these aspects? But there can be no absolute independence upon these planes. But my sense of independence, which is the ego, when your ego is there, you feel that you are independent. You don't need to depend upon others. You don't need to depend upon the universe, which is not true at all. Okay? Sometimes when you are angry with your friend, go, I don't need you. Okay? But you do need everybody else. Okay? That's the whole point. Maybe with one person you don't need him, but you need everybody else. You exist only because the others exist. Your body can exist only because the universal matter exists. Exactly in the same way, your soul also is all the time interacting with other souls. At every level, from the lowest level to the highest level, there's an interaction. The universal and the individual are always interacting with each other. They are involved also in each other. But there can be no absolute independence upon these planes. Okay? You can't be independent. Impersonality, which rejects all mental and physical becoming, is therefore the only possible culmination of this exclusive movement. The exclusive movement in the physical world. When you exclude everything else and you think that you are independent of everybody else, you feel that you are on your own, you can exist by yourself, which is not true. Even in the physical world, you need to interact with the physical world. If you don't eat, you will die. So even at the physical level, you need the universe. At the vital level also, you need your emotional impact from others, relationships. And if you, even at the mental level also, you are constantly interacting with others. It's a very interesting thing actually, because when the astronaut goes out into space for a long time, okay, he is not interacting with everybody. It's an interesting thing. And therefore, there's a tendency of delusion and hallucination. And that is why the astronauts are trained to be by themselves. And they've experimented, even for 24 hours, if you put one person into a dark room with no sound and no light, okay, it can make you mad. Okay, it's a very interesting experiment. So you are trained to be deprived of your senses. Okay. So this is the fact that you depend upon the physical world. There can be no absolute independence upon these planes. Impersonality, which rejects all mental and physical becoming. Mental and physical becoming, the physical world. Impersonality, the second level of the spiritual planes of consciousness. Okay. I'm identifying each word so that you have a clear relation with the three levels. Okay. Is therefore the only possible culmination of this exclusive movement. In other words, when you are in the ego, the next step can only be impersonality. Okay? Your individuality disappears. Your individuality disappears and you feel yourself to be impersonal. But Surendra is now, I'm anticipating, okay? So the question comes up, if I am outside the universe, I don't have any individuality. Is it possible for me to have an individuality and yet remain in the physical world? Srim's answer is very clear. Yes, but you have to go to the third level. Okay, that's it. The difference now between all these are very clear, no? So, but there can be no absolute independence upon these planes. Which planes? The lower plane and even the in the physical planes. Physical plane, vital plane, mental plane. Absolute independence is not possible. You have to depend on the others. Impersonality, which rejects all mental and physical becoming. Impersonality, second level, when you are there, you are rejecting your mind, you are rejecting your body, and you are rejecting your vital also. Is therefore the only possible culmination of this exclusive movement. Exclusive movement, the consciousness of the ego. You are excluding everybody else. So, only can an absolutely independent self-experience be achieved. Okay? So only, you have to stress the word so only, in this way, okay, that's what it means. So only can an absolutely independent self-existent experience be achieved. The soul then seems to exist absolutely independently in itself. It is free in the sense of the Indian word swadhina. The word adhina means you are under the influence of somebody else. But swadhina, swa-adhina, you are dependent only on yourself, dependent only on itself, not dependent upon God or other beings. Now note that when you are in the second level, there is no God for you. It's very rare. Okay? But if you are going through Bhakti Yoga, maybe you can get God, but not through Jnana Yoga. When you go to the spiritual planes of consciousness, very often there is no God. You feel yourself to be the infinite impersonal. Okay. You will be surprised, but there are so many people who have realized that second level and they say that. Okay. Not Buddha, but Buddhism says that, Mayavada says that, the ascetic says that, and even our Jiddu Krishnamurti says that there is no God. It's your own mind that is creating God. And even our Sadguru, he also says the same thing. Okay? There is no God. That's all your own imagination. There is no personal God. Okay? Therefore, in this experience, God, the personal self, and other beings are all denied. In the second level, you deny the experience of the personal God. It's very natural. They're not wrong, because that's the experience that you get in the second level. Cast away as distinctions of the ignorance. All limitation and all personal things are ignorance, because they are separations. So why should there be a personal God? It's not possible. It is the ego recognizing its own insufficiency and abolishing both itself and its contraries, that its own essential instinct of independent self-experience may be accomplished. The rising to the second level is the denial of the ego. That's what Simba is saying. As distinction, it is the ego recognizing its own insufficiency and abolishing both itself and its contraries. So the ego says, I was only a fiction of nature, okay, fiction created by nature, I don't exist anymore. Recognizing its own insufficiency and abolishing both itself, it abolishes itself as well as its contraries. And what are the contraries? In the physical world, all that is not you is a contrary. Okay, that's its own essential instinct of independent self-experience may be accomplished. So that's what you realize when you go to the second level. In the second level, yes, you do become independent and you don't depend upon anybody in the second level. It seems like that. Actually, you do depend upon God, but you don't seem to think like that. For it finds that its effort to achieve it by relation with God and others is afflicted throughout with a sense of illusion. The moment you think of relation, it seems to be unreal. Vanity, uselessness. Okay? Vanity is often used in the sense of pride, but here it's not being used in that sense. It means uselessness. There is no value, vanity, and nullity, zero. There's nothing. Okay? It's a nothingness. It ceases to admit them because by admitting them, it becomes dependent on them. You don't even admit the physical world's existence, because the moment you do that, you are admitting that multiplicity is possible, but you are experiencing that multiplicity is not, it's unreal. Okay? Admitting them becomes dependent on them. It ceases to admit its own persistence. The Buddhists say you disappear, your own body, mind, life disappears, but you abolish your own individual existence also, because you have become the infinite. You have become the infinite. Again, to understand this, remember the grain of salt, which is the limited personality, and the grain of salt dissolving in the universe, saltiness everywhere. You are there everywhere, but no form, no shape, no color, no size. It ceases to admit them because by admit that way, sorry. Then the self-annihilation of the Buddhist is in its nature absolute exclusion of all that the mental being perceives. So at our level, we feel that we are excluding everybody else, and that is the reality. But that reality becomes possible only when you go to the third level. Second level. When you go to the spiritual planes of consciousness, you realize that you are the infinite and the world doesn't exist for you. Okay. The self-immersion of the Advaitin in his absolute being is the self-same aim, differently conceived. The conception of the Buddhists is they are identifying ego and individuality. Okay? And they feel that along with the ego, the individuality also has gone away. But the Advaitin says he gets the same experience, but he says, no. The ego disappears, but not the individuality. The grain of salt with its features disappears, but not the saltiness. Okay? That's the Advaita philosophy. Clear? Both are a supreme self-assertion of the soul, of its exclusive independence of Prakriti. Prakriti is your body, mind, life at a personal level. So you have nothing to do with body, mind, life. Even if the body, mind, life disappears after death, you exist. So you are independent of Prakriti. That's what Shadvi is saying. That is liberation. The chapter is the soul and its liberation. Okay? So we can go to the next one. The basic idea is simple, but it is abstract. So we have to think about it a lot. And we have discussed it in detail, level 1, level 2, level 3. Then you think more and more about it, you will see that all the ideas fall into place. Okay? So, let's read the next one. The experience
Can
with...
I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
You know, there is a line, the soul that knows how to live alone meets God.
Okay.
So, the soul that knows how to live alone, what exactly does it mean?
That means you are conscious of God. But in the spiritual planes of consciousness, when you are doing Jnana Yoga, then you don't live with God. There is no God for you. But the one who is doing Bhakti Yoga, he is constantly associated with God. Okay. So for him, there is no problem. There is no impersonality. He has a relation with the divine. That is the Ramanuja philosophy. It is possible to have a relation with the divine. But the one who is a Jnana Yogi, there is no possibility of relationship. Because relationship means again limitation. You are thinking of yourself as separate from God. Normally at the second level, this is what happens. But at the second level, you can also have the cosmic consciousness, if you remember. And when you have the cosmic consciousness, you don't reject the physical world. That is why Shankara has been misinterpreted. Because Shankara says, of course you can have a relation with the divine. Because love is possible along with knowledge. Knowledge does not necessarily reject love. Love implies two. Knowledge implies only one. You become the infinite. But in a relation of love, which is a tremendous experience of sweetness and ananda, okay, there is the two. So it is normally considered that that is a duality and therefore it is inferior to the Jnana Yoga. But that's not true because that's another aspect altogether. As they say, you can't compare oranges and apples. They are two different things. But the ascetic, the Jnana Yogi, has a tendency to think that his experience is more fundamental than the Bhakti Yoga. Because there you are seeing two, but here you are seeing only one, and that's the ultimate. So that's it. So when you say that someone is living with God, okay, alone, that is precisely Bhakti. You can't live with God without Bhakti, without a relation of love. Okay. Note that even the Jnana Yogi, okay, they get sometimes Ananda is there. Okay? There is a Ananda that happens. But the sense of individual God may not be there at all. So, Yasmin's question of a man who lives alone with God is very clearly Bhakti Yoga. Okay? That's possible with Bhakti Yoga, but not with Jnana Yoga. It is possible, but usually does not occur like that. Okay?
Rangada, can I ask a question too?
Yes, please go ahead, Suki.
In the paragraph we just went through, Sri Aurobindo said, ego by recognizing its own insufficiency, it excludes all the stuff of the mental cognition of that insufficiency. And in the last two lines, both are the supreme self-assertion of the soul of its exclusive independence of the Prakriti. So for me, it seems like ego excludes everything in its mental limitation, but the last line also seems to say the soul do the similar thing, like exclude everything of the mental stuff.
Yes.
So which one is which denies the all the mental limitation? Is it ego or is the soul?
Yes. Ego is mainly in the mind. There is a certain ego in the physical also, but there is an ego also in the vital. Even the animal has got an ego, but the beginning of an ego. The real ego is in the mind. Okay, so the real ego is in the mind. When the mind comes in, the ego develops fully, and it's very necessary to have the ego, because if you don't have the ego, how will you develop yourself? So I don't know. Your exact question, Sumki, is the ego mental? Is that what you're asking?
I mean, actually the last two lines, it says that the supreme self-assertion of the soul of
Ah.
its exclusive independence of Prakriti. So these two lines seem to say soul also has that exclusive movement, with which the soul exclude others. So that also sounds like what ego does.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
So let's look at that last sentence very carefully. Okay. The self-annihilation of the Buddhist. The self-annihilation Buddhist, the Buddhist says, my body, mind, life is not real. My ego is not real. Even my personality is not real. Okay? Even my individuality is not real. Complete exclusion of all these things, of all that the mental being perceives. The mental being is perceiving your body, it is perceiving your emotions, and it is perceiving your thoughts. All this, the Buddhist says, is to be excluded because it is not true. Okay? So, the self-immersion of the Advaitin is like a distinction between the Advaitin and the Buddhist. Okay? So, the Advaitin says that the ego disappears. It's true that the body, mind, life also can disappear, but you will not disappear. That's the difference. Just now, as I told you, there's a difference between the ego and the true individuality, not the false individuality. The false individuality is your identification with body, mind, life. But the true individuality is you are a separate soul, but without dependence on body, mind, life. And ego, which identified itself with the body, mind, life, disappears because there's no body, mind, life anymore. Okay, that's what he's saying. Sonki,
yes.
I feel that if you uh, formulate your question, okay, you will get the answer. So
Okay.
do one thing, okay?
Mhm.
You formulate the question and send it to me by email, okay?
Okay, I will.
If you do that, then you will
Mhm.
probably get the solution itself, or I will try and see where your statement is not absolutely accurate. Then the
Okay.
solution will come. Okay.
Yes, I will send you the question. Thank you.
Very often I have seen that our questions arise because there is a little bit of non-understanding in the of the problem. So we put the problem in a slightly different way. But if you put the problem in the right way, immediately the answer becomes clear. Okay.
Yes.
Anyway, so that's the paragraph that we did just now. It's a very subtle paragraph, and he is explaining. The subtlety is in the Buddhist is equating ego with true individuality, which is not true. And the Advaitin is having the subtlety to understand that the ego is that it's just a shadow of the true individuality. And the true individuality need not be the body, mind, life. It need not be limited. It can be unlimited. That's the whole point. And the understanding of this is very clear with the image of the salt. Okay, the grain of salt. It's got features. It's got weight, size, color, shape. But the weight, size, color, shape disappears. But the saltiness, the essential quality of the salt remains. It is there everywhere. That's an individual. Okay? It is still individual, but at a very subtle level. Okay? And there is also one, we can mention another thing which I have spoken of earlier also. When you feel yourself to be the universe, okay, who is feeling that you are the universe? Somebody is there who is feeling that I am universal. Okay? That's a true individuality. But there is a higher plane of consciousness where even that I am feeling disappears and you become the infinite without even feeling that I am the infinite. Even that disappears. That's what the Buddhist wants. Okay? So we have got 4 minutes. So let's read the next paragraph. Okay? The experience which we first arrive at.
Shall I read?
Yes, go ahead.
The experience which we first arrive at by the sort of shortcut to liberation, which we have described as the movement of withdrawal, assists this tendency. Therefore, it is a breaking of the ego and a rejection of the habits of the mentality we now possesses. For that is subject to matter and the physical senses and conceives of things only as forms, objects, external phenomena, and as names which we attach to those forms. We are not aware directly of the subjective life of other beings except by analogy from our own and by inference or derivative perception based upon their external signs of speech, action, etc., which our minds translate into the terms of our own subjectivity. When we break out from ego and physical mind into the infinity of the spirit, we still see the world and others as the mind has accustomed us to see them as names and forms. Only in our new experience of the direct and superior reality of the spirit, they lose that direct objective reality and that indirect subjective reality of their own, which they had to the mind. They seem to be quite the opposite of the truer reality we now experience. Our mentality, stilled and indifferent, no longer strives to know and make real to itself those intermediate terms which exist in them as in us, and the knowledge of which has for its utility to bridge over the gulf between the spiritual self and the objective phenomena of the world. We are satisfied with the blissful infinite impersonality of a pure spiritual existence. Nothing else and nobody else any longer matters to us. What the physical senses show to us and what the mind perceives and conceives about them, and so imperfectly and transiently delights in, seems now unreal and worthless. We are not and do not care to be in possession of the intermediate truth of being through which these things are enjoyed by the one and possesses for him that value of his being and delight which makes, as we might say, cosmic existence a thing beautiful to him and worth manifesting. We can no longer share in God's delight in the world. On the contrary, it looks to us as if the eternal had degraded itself by admitting into the purity of its being to gross nature of matter, or had falsified the truth of its being by imagining vain names and unreal forms. Or else, if we perceive at all that delight, it is with a far-off detachment which prevents us from participating in it with any sense of intimate possession, or it is with an attachment to the superior delight of an observed and exclusive self-experience, which does not allow us to stay any longer in these lower terms than we are compelled to stay by the continuance of our physical life and body.
Yeah. So, it's time actually. It is now 8:26. We have gone beyond our time. So, we'll take this up now and we'll redo the paragraph. So, the experience which you first arrived at, a sort of short liberation, is discussing the usual experience of liberation and its many interpretations. So, he is giving his own interpretation which differs from the traditional interpretation. So we'll have a look at that next time. So we can put it on chat. Okay. We put so we have to do page 441 and we have to redo experience which we first arrived at. Okay. So usually Archana does that. Okay. And she's already typing. I can see that she's typing. And there we are. So redo synthesis Friday 7th. The experience.
Let's go.
Okay, au revoir everybody.